This is the Bryan Hyde Show.
Well, hello there. Welcome to the show. Yeah, took a couple days off last week, not so much by choice. We had quite the winter storm come blowing through here. First one, actually, of the winter. I mean, this was the first real snowfall, real accumulation. And let's just say my plans had to change of a sudden. And anyway, got everything handled, but it meant putting the show on the back burner for a couple of days, which is unfortunate because there was a lot going on. And I, of course, I'm conditioned to want to comment on everything. Oh, somebody needs to comment on this. Someone needs to make observations, thoughtful, observances while they stroke their beard and tut-tut. And, well, maybe I'm not that guy. But anyway, it's good to be back and good to be looking ahead at what is coming. I still can't decide if I am more optimistic or maybe just a little more paranoid about what lies before us. Now, some of the things that have happened in the last 4 weeks have been nothing short of remarkable in terms of how much of the corruption that was carefully hidden from our sight has been dragged kicking and screaming out into the sunlight. And it's been interesting to watch, the news media try to portray this as, well, this isn't really saving you any money, and this is just a big power play on the part of Elon Musk or, Donald Trump, or both of them, and Trump is subordinate to Musk. And they're trying everything they can to stay ahead of the narrative or to maintain, the narrative that, hey, government is good and everything it does and everything it spends is all in your interest. But that veneer has come off. I think the mask was slipping anyway. For anybody who was paying attention, it's very clear that the current system of government as we have it in the United States, as well as other places, it's not in the least related to, in America, what the founders intended. I mean, they spelled out very clearly what is the purpose of government. It's in the Declaration of Independence, if you need a refresher course. Why would they rebel against their mother country? Why would they commit, do I dare say, sedition? But they did. In telling the mother country, hey, get out of here. You are not protecting our inalienable, God-given rights. In fact, you're abrogating them. You are, just basically milking us for taxes without representing us in government. We are going to step away from you. And they did. And we will create a government that will respond to, its proper role, which is to protect and secure our inalienable rights. Now, it wasn't as easy as just, we'll sign this document, and there it is, all neat and proper. You'll be notified by certified mail that you are no longer our government. Britain, at least King George, had a few thoughts on that and actually sent armed troops to enforce, no, you will not be going. Try and leave me, babe. See what happens, Which, coincidentally, is kind of the same thing Lincoln did in the war between the states. But that's a story for another time. But the bottom line is, we have been on a trajectory that is taking us further and further away from the proper role of government and more into I'll be generous and say an authoritarian type of government, although it's really got some very totalitarian aspects, and none more so than the wokeness, by which I mean the political correctness, the cultural Marxism that's been forced on us over the last couple of generations, particularly in the last decade. And the funny thing is, you can track this. You can actually see how that woke mind virus has threaded its way into society and essentially obtained control over most of the corporations, most of the institutions, especially government, but even into churches, even into academia. Well, academia was one of the places it kind of got its starts. That was the fertile soil in which those seeds were planted. And so now you have this intense confusion on many people's parts about, well, what is a woman? I can't say. I'm not a biologist. And gender is such a broad spectrum that really we should let men into women's sports and let them do whatever they want. And it was getting very tiresome. And under the Biden administration, it was very clear that their goal was, we're going to force as much of this down your throat as we possibly can and then dare you to push back. Well, the pushback, or the snapback, I guess, as you would call it, has happened. And since Trump has taken office, man, he has rolled back so much of the political correctness and just so much of the damaging policies that were meant to cripple our independence, cripple our autonomy as a nation and also as individuals. And to me, it's just fascinating to watch all of the chickens come home to roost, and to see that it starts with just figure out where the money's going. Look, I've heard a lot of people opine and even kind of questioned it myself. Well, who is the shadowy billionaire behind the scenes who is funding, for instance, the riots, the 2020 riots, the Black Lives Matter and Antifa riots? They were far too organized. They were far too well funded. How did these pallets of bricks suddenly appear on the street the day before, big riot would take place? Well, the shadowy billionaire who was funding all of this, turns out it was you and me. It was the American taxpayer. It wasn't any individual. George Soros, I'm sorry. We had you propped up as the world's most evil man. And believe me, you've got your place. You're a pretty shady character. But it's the systems that were put in place. And so, again, this leaves me with this situation where, on the one hand, I'm very encouraged, even though the conflict is growing and it's getting intense. In fact, I'm going to give you a couple of examples here. I am going to end on a positive note today, so don't worry. I will ensure that we're not doom scrolling verbally here. But one of the things that really hit me was when Vice President JD Vance went and spoke to European leaders at the Munich Security Conference this last week. And he called them out for how they are depending on the U.S. to support them. Right? The U.S., well, you'll protect us, right? Because the U.S. is the biggest contributor to NATO, and, we depend on you to keep Russia at bay. And, Trump is actually talking to Russia and saying, hey, let's get this peace negotiated in Ukraine so the killing can stop. And Ukraine is now saying, well, we're not going to accept any peace deal if the U.S. is talking to Russia. And so what needs to happen there? Well, I'll be blunt. The U.S. needs to say, okay, the aid stops. Good luck. You're on your own. Although the European nations now are making noise, and I mean like serious noise, like, well, if the U.S. isn't going to step up and do this for us, if they're not going to take on that Russian bear for us, maybe we should just go ahead and declare war on Russia ourselves. Now, on the one hand, I'd kind of be tempted to say you're welcome to it. On the other hand, I have family that live in Europe. My kids, I have a couple of my kids that live there, and it concerns me greatly. I don't want them to suddenly find themselves on a battleground. But I was very impressed with JD Vance for calling out those European leaders for failing to live up to the principles that supposedly we're helping them defend, right? We're defending democracy, right? No. They don't even have free speech anymore. This is one of the things that I found most fascinating was JD Vance called out those European leaders by invoking American exceptionalism. And I don't mean that America's better than everybody else, but just these are the qualities, these are the virtues and the principles that made America something very unique in the world's history. And he also called them out about moral clarity. And, they did not like that. I like how Jordan Schachtel put it. In fact, I'm including, this is one of the more recent articles from his dossier Substack. He says, the VP exposed, meaning JD Vance exposed, that Americans sometimes find ourselves on an island of principled exceptionalism. But he says that's okay. In fact, he recalls back in his 1981 inaugural address, Ronald Reagan famously called on Americans to do whatever needs to be done to preserve this last and greatest bastion of freedom. Well, Vance proudly carried that legacy forward by defining the principles that make America great and challenging Europeans to live up to their foundations. Now, some of the things that he's talking about, these are hard things for the Europeans. And some of the examples here that are given are radical Islamic immigration, globalist fascism, a continually declining birth rate, a continent-wide brain drain, and, of course, the climate hoax. Which, if you've spent time in Europe, you'll know that those are all factors that are playing heavily into what is happening to the European people. So let's break them down quickly here. Jordan Schachtel says, over recent decades, Europe has imported tens of millions of people from third world hellholes, the vast majority of whom will not assimilate, and who have not been asked to assimilate into their host nations. Now the radical Islamic migrants have begun the process of capturing and weaponizing European institutions. And he says, for instance, the British government and many others is tragically inundated with high-ranking officials and bureaucrats who seek to fundamentally transform their countries into a continuation of the Ummah. Think about how many people in Britain have been sent to prison, like literally imprisoned, for posts or things that they've said on social media. Vance was calling them out about that. That's not free speech. And 60 Minutes, by the way, I didn't watch the whole show. I've just seen a couple of clips, but 60 Minutes actually sent a news crew with German authorities going around arresting people, writing people up for posts on social media. Well, we believe in free speech, but at the same time, we should be able to arrest you if you share something that is a lie. Yeah, well, according to whom, right? Who's the final arbiter of what is truth? They're on very dangerous ice. Next, Jordan Schachtel talks about the globalist fascism, best captured through Klaus Schwab's annual confab in Davos, where European elites decide which narratives they will attempt to forcibly impose on humanity in the future. Now, sometimes this involves calling for and imposing widespread social media censorship. But as JD Vance put it, if it involves firewalling viewpoints not deemed worthy by European elites. And by the way, they took great exception to him saying that. How dare you say that? Why, that should be a crime. Well, you kind of just made his point there. Next, he talks about the declining birth rate in Western Europe and how it's become a significant demographic challenge, shaping social, economic, and political landscapes. Over recent decades, numerous countries in Western Europe, including France, Germany, Italy, Spain, and the United Kingdom, have seen a consistent drop in birth rates, leading to aging populations and shrinking workforces. Now, primarily, economic considerations are going to be a pivotal role in this shrinking birth rate, but the high cost of living, especially in major cities, and the expenses associated with child rearing, well, that's keeping a lot of people from having kids in the first place. Housing, education, healthcare costs are considerable, making expanding a family less appealing or even feasible for many. And of course, cultural shifts also influence birth rates. The traditional model of family life has been targeted for destruction, with society normalizing permanent singlehood and childless couples. So while native Western Europeans continue to see population decline, their replacements in the foreign migrant class will continue to become a greater percentage of the population, leading to more trouble in the future. He also points out that Europe has witnessed an extraordinary continuing exodus of talent due to its unfriendly business and regulatory environment. And that brain drain, people fleeing Europe, has profound implications, leading to a loss of human capital, innovation, and economic growth in countless countries across the continent. And finally, this is a big one, much of Europe's implosion is linked, sometimes indirectly, to the anti-human spawned climate hoax, which has damaged the continent on every imaginable front. Think about what they pay for energy. I have 2 kids in Germany, and their energy costs, and I'm talking for electricity, are some of the highest in the world. What they pay, it's to the point where it's like we're really concerned. We don't want people leaving lights on. You remember how Dad used to give that speech? Why, if you leave these lights on, we're going to go broke. I'll never recover from this. But in Europe, that's actually a real concern. The electric bill is massive, and yet there's also this push. Everybody should be driving electric cars, and it's expensive to fuel up. I'm putting that in air quotes. Your electric car. Anyway, here's how Jordan Schachtel puts it. He says, an American leader roasting smug Europeans will never get old, ever. And it's especially the case when that leader is speaking unpopular truths. Europe should serve as a cautionary tale for our last and greatest bastion of freedom. No other nation will pick up the mantle if we fail to uphold our standards and values. That may seem like it's harsh, but I think it's actually some tough love that's been long overdue. All right, the other article I wanted to share with you, and this kind of touches on what I was expressing here in the first opening moments of the show today. Is our 5-year nightmare finally over? Jeffrey Tucker from the Brownstone Institute penned this piece. I really appreciate Jeffrey's analysis. I think he is one of the more thoughtful and informed commentators out there. And frankly, on issues like especially the pandemic and the lockdowns and so forth, I don't know of a better source. The guy was just dead on and willing to do the hard work of studying epidemiology and studying history, and he is definitely someone who's not afraid to dig in and sort out the facts for himself. He doesn't wait for someone to spoon feed it to him. We can take a lesson from that, by the way. But Jeffrey Tucker says, Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s confirmation as Secretary of Health and Human Services in the U.S. is the ultimate repudiation of the COVID policy response. He says the scheme of lockdown till vaccination was the biggest effort of government and industry on a global scale that we have on historical record. It was all designed to transfer wealth to winning industries like pharma, online retail, streaming services, online education, and to divide and conquer the population and consolidate power in the administrative state. I think we can safely say that's exactly what we saw happen. And by 2021, RFK Jr. had emerged as the world's most vocal, erudite, and knowledgeable critic of the scheme. In fact, he wrote 2 very exceptional books, one of them The Real Anthony Fauci, the other The Wuhan Cover-Up. He documented the entire enterprise and dated the evolution of the pandemic industry from its post-war inception to the present. Jeffrey Tucker says there's just no way to read these books and then think about the corporatist cabal in the same way. Now, he goes through and breaks down what has happened here and says the circumstances that led to RFK Jr.'s appointment at Health and Human Services are themselves implausible and remarkable, perceiving President Biden to be a weak candidate, one who had forced masks and shots on the population and brutally censored tech and media. RFK Jr. decided to make a run for president, presuming there would be an open primary. Well, there wasn't one, so he was forced into an independent run. That effort was chewed up by the usual political dynamic that befalls every third-party effort, too many ballot access barriers, plus the usual logic of Duverger's law. By the way, I had to look that one up. I was not familiar with Duverger's law, but for those who don't know, it's a political science principle named after the French sociologist Maurice Duverger. Maybe I'm saying his name wrong. Duverger. Anyway, there's 2 things it says about electoral systems. In a first-past-the-post electoral system, like that used in the U.S. for presidential and congressional elections, a 2-party system tends to emerge. And this is because smaller parties are at a disadvantage as voters tend to support the larger parties to avoid wasting their vote on a party with little chance of winning. So that's the wasted vote phenomenon. Anyway, but that left his campaign in a difficult spot. And at the same time, 2 huge political shifts became clear. The Democratic Party had become a vessel and a front mainly for the administrative state with a veneer of woke ideology, while the Republican Party was being taken over by refugees from the Democrats, in effect, creating a new Trump party out of the remnants of the other 2. And he says the rest is legendary. Trump linked up with Elon Musk to do to the federal government what he did to Twitter when he took over the company, taking the company private, gutting the place of embedded federal assets, and firing 4 out of 5 workers. In the midst of this, and faced with a terrifying flurry of legal attacks, Trump dodged an assassin's bullet. That triggered terrible memories of RFK Jr.'s father and uncle, and thus sparked discussions about coming together. Within a matter of weeks, we had a new coalition that brought together old antagonists as many people and groups seemingly in the same instant realized their conjoined interests in cleaning up the corporatist cartel. So with the newly freed platform of X to reach the public, MAGA, Maha, and Doge was born. Trump won and chose RFK Jr. to lead the most powerful public health agency in the world. Now, the barrier was Senate confirmation, says Jeffrey Tucker, but that was achieved through some incredible triangulation that made it extremely difficult to vote no for everyone except that brain-dead Mitch McConnell. Nonetheless, in the big picture, that's my observation, by the way, not Jeffrey's. In the big picture, he says you can measure up the size of this titanic shift in American politics by the way the votes in the Senate lined up. All Republicans, but one voted for the most prominent scion of the Democratic Party to head the health empire, while all Democrats voted no. Now, that alone is striking and a testament to the power of the pharma lobby, which during the hearings was exposed as the hidden hand behind the most passionate opponents of the confirmation. But here's the magic question. Is the nightmare over? And this is where I start to get a little bit unsettled, because the answer is not yet. Writing not even a month into the second presidential term of Donald Trump, Jeffrey Tucker says it's still unclear just how much authority he truly exercises over the sprawling executive branch. For that matter, no one can even agree on how large this branch is, between 2.2 and 3 million employees and somewhere between 400 and 450 agencies. The financial bleed in this realm is unthinkable and far worse than even the biggest cynic can imagine. I mean, 5 former secretaries of the Treasury took to the pages of the New York Times with a shocking claim the nation's payment system has historically been operated by a very small group of nonpartisan career civil servants. Now, this has included a career employee called Fiscal Assistant Secretary, a post that for the prior 8 decades has been reserved exclusively for civil servants to ensure impartiality and public confidence in the handling and payment of federal funds. Jeffrey Tucker says there's no reason to even read between the lines. What that means is that no person voted into office by the people and no one appointed by such a person has access to the federal books since 1946. That is startling beyond belief. No owner of any company would ever tolerate being barred from the accounting offices and payment systems. And no company can offer public stock without independent audits and open books. And yet almost 80 years have gone by, during which time neither has been true for the gigantic enterprise called the federal government. That means that $193 trillion has been spent by an institution that has never faced granulated oversight from the people and never met the normal demands that every enterprise faces every day. Now, I'm going to skip to the chase here. But basically, Jeffrey is saying here the trajectory on which we find ourselves affords many reasons for champagne celebrations, but sober up quickly. He says there's a long way to go and enormous barriers in place to get us to the point that we're really safe again from the marauding corporatist statist complex and their plots and schemes to rob the public of rights and liberties. In the meantime, to invoke a common phrase, keep these new appointees in your thoughts and prayers. Good advice. And by the way, if you're not including, prayer as a part of your, daily boldness to face the world or to gird up your loins, so to speak, to go out there and fight the good fight for whatever it is that you stand for, man, you're leaving a very important tool sitting there on the bench. I know people mock, well, thoughts and prayers don't accomplish anything. I disagree. For reasons that I will not go into at this time, but I couldn't disagree more strongly. There is power in prayer. Anyone who practices it regularly will know that. All right. Having said that, here is the hopeful note on which I hope to end today's show. Breaking out of a mindset of scarcity is a lot harder than it sounds. And this is one of the things that I think a lot of us are facing right now. We suffered some pretty good mental abuse during the pandemic. And I'm not trying to say, therefore, we're all victims and we should all just give up because we have no control. I'm just saying that the scars that we have are real. That was a very traumatic time. And it forced many of us, myself included, into a scarcity mindset of, oh, there isn't going to be enough. Do I have enough of this? Do I have enough of that? Which is a terrible place to live your life. That's the stuff that keeps you awake at night with your stomach, digesting itself and just... You're just anxious. But Paul Rosenberg makes the case that scarcity on earth has been fundamentally overcome. And what's sad about this is that is the truth that we cannot accept. Here's how he puts it. He says, there's a simple fact that people are unable to ingest. You can explain it with charts, graphs, and documentation. They may even like the sound of it, but it soon fades and is forgotten. The truth is simply too foreign to us. It doesn't fit within our mental universe. Most of us don't particularly fight it, but we're very slow to integrate it. So he says, please bear in mind, it may affect you. The truth is massively good news, which, by the way, is strange too. Bad news, people believe instantly, but good news, they doubt instantly. And that news is that scarcity upon earth has been fundamentally overcome. And here's what he means. We've been growing more food than we can eat for decades now, and we could grow more if we needed to. Building houses for everyone would be no problem. We have the entire set of technologies and processes worked out. Materials are available. There's no lack of people who would be glad to work as a home builder. Likewise, providing quality medical care to all is within our reach. And of course, cars and roads are no problem, but he says, before I get to support and objections, I'm going to restate the main point. The doors to a golden age have swung open before us, but we're having a hard time accepting that it's real. So why can't we believe it? He says, before I get to the details of the disbelief, he says, let me tell you where you can find all the documentation you would like. First of all, he mentions the other side of scarcity. This is an issue of his newsletter that he'd written, but he says, we cover many of the primary sources here, even studies showing an increase in intelligence from overcoming scarcity. Then you have the words of Julian Simon, especially the ultimate resource and the state of humanity. Lots of hard data in these. Plus the work of Stephen Moore and Johann Nordberg. Particularly, it's getting better all the time and progress. And just to support this a bit, he says, here's a part of a presentation from Norman Borlaug, the man who revolutionized modern agriculture, won a Nobel Prize for that, and saved 1 billion lives in the process. This was delivered in September of 2000. He said, I now say that the world has the technology either available or well advanced in the research pipeline to feed, on a sustainable basis, a population of 10 billion people. Now, Paul says you'll find similar passages in the resources noted above. So, from a scientific standpoint, our main points are very solid, and on the production side, scarcity was overcome some decades ago. Why then is this non-believable? Okay, here are the reasons. First of all, we've been raised to believe in regimentation, to see it as a path to paradise, and to treat it as a sublime invention. But regimentation is entirely focused on the bad. We believe that by suppressing evil, we create a better world for ourselves. So anything that smells of a present golden age, a good age, is incompatible with our beloved regimentation. That means our deep assumptions would have to be revised, and that's uncomfortable. Beyond that sits the fact that scarcity is a psychological necessity to us. If we no longer need to fight over resources, how do we show ourselves superior? Objections to this discussion tend to be indirect, things like, dealing with things like human desires are infinite. However, these are paper arguments. We're discussing concrete things like food and houses. And of course, there's a difference between wants and needs. Wants are bounded only by our imagination and so are unfit for a serious and this worldly discourse. But a comfortable home, good food, and reliable transportation, those are needs. Ferraris, mansions, and caviar, those are wants. Likewise, arguments over finite resources are distractions. We have plenty of materials right now, including fuels for both fusion and fission. Additionally, there are planets and asteroid belts waiting for us in the not-too-distant future. So in actual fact, there are fewer starving people all the time. Moreover, the cause of whatever starvation remains almost wholly political, not technological. So what we need to do is talk about these things. He says we need to review the sources, examine the graphs, and start working this into ourselves as an actual possibility. He says we really need to step into a golden age, as impossibly foreign as that may seem. In fact, we've been doing precisely that, mostly by accident for decades. And he says if we worked at it, we might go down in history as the generation that transformed humanity forever. I've got a link to this and the other articles in my show notes. You can check them out for yourself at thebryanhydeshow.com. These are show notes for February 17th, 2025.
This is The Bryan Hyde Show.